How to cut and sew a waistband. First, determine the length of the waistband. A simple formula is take your waist measurement plus the extension. The extension is the part of the waistband that extends to the outside or the inside of the band, and it will contain the buttons or the snaps or whatever fasteners are used to close the waistband. Next, you will need to add in your seam allowances on each end of the waistband. So you have two ends, so you will determine twice times the seam allowances. In my example, I am using a 20 1/4 inch waistband for the cut length, and how we derived that amount is we've taken the waist measurement at 17. We've added a 2-inch extension for the buttons or buttonholes or snaps or hooks. And then we've added the seam allowance, and I'm using 5/8 inch seam allowance times 2 equals 1 1/4. So 17 plus the 2 inches plus the 1 1/4 equals a cut length of 20 1/4 length. Next, you will want to determine the width of the waistband. The width of the waistband is a personal decision. Your garment may look better with a more narrow width or a wider width. For the width, you will basically determine how wide you want your waistband times 2, since it will be folded over. Then you would add in your seam allowances on each side of the waistband times 2. And again, using that formula, if I want my waistband to be a finished width of 1.5 inches wide, and I'm going to use 5/8 inch seam allowance, my formula would be to cut the width at 3 inches, which is twice 1.5, plus the 1 1/4, which is twice the 5/8 inch. So my cut width formula would be 3 inches plus 1 1/4 inches would equal the 4 1/4 inch cut width. I now have my waistband cut at 20 1/4 inches long in length, and also measuring approximately 4 1/4 inches across. I've placed a second piece of fabric next to the waistband. This second piece of fabric shows the selvage edge of the fabric. The selvage edge runs the lengthwise grain of the fabric. The lengthwise grain of the fabric has the most strength. One thing to note about cutting and sewing a waistband is you want to cut the length of the waistband along the lengthwise grain of the fabric, or parallel to the selvage. This is where the most strength of the fabric lies. And since a waistband goes around the body, and particularly around the waist, that piece of fabric will need to be as stable as possible. And the lengthwise grain is the most stable and where the most strength of the fabric lie. Additionally, to add even more stability, you will want to apply interfacing to the waistband to give it more body and more stability. Notice my interfacing is cut slightly smaller than the waistband. This is a fusible, and when you're using fusibles, you will want to leave a perimeter of fabric around the edge. Reason being is because fusibles have the glue or the adhesive side that gets applied to the wrong side of the fabric. And we want to contain any glue or minimize any spillage or overflow of that adhesive. So we will go ahead and, following manufacturer's guidelines, fuse a piece of interfacing to the waistband. Now this is a fairly lightweight fabric. Generally, the weight of your interfacing will coordinate with the weight of your fabric. To mark the markings on your waistband to aid you in stowing the waistband to the garment, you want to place small dots at your 5/8 inch seam allowance. In this case, I am using 5/8 of an inch. So you will place those marks at your 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. At each corner of your waistband. Then you will make your extension mark. I'm using a 2-inch extension, starting from that 5/8 inch seam allowance. I'm measuring down 2 inches. I'm going to make this a larger dot. Again, remember the extension, when we fold over the waistband, the extension part will contain any buttons, buttonholes, snaps, or fasteners that will close up your waistband. And from the extension to the opposite end of the waistband to the 5/8 inch seam stitch line, you want to fold, bring together and fold these two and meet those marks. This fold line, or this crease that I'm making, will become the center front of the waistband. So we're going to crease that and label it center front. You can also take a ruler or your sewing guide or straight edge and draw a line. You now want to take your garment and be sure to open up your seam or your zipper opening, and you want to pin your waistband to your garment. I'm going to flip this to the front, and we want to match center front of the waistband to center front of the garment. And place a pin. Then we're beginning pinning around the waistband to the garment, matching the raw edges. And since the seams on this garment are just flat and open seams, we're going to stitch those seams open. So we want to pin them to keep them open as we're stitching the waistband to the garment. The extension will extend out past the opening of the garment. And you want to pin in at the very end. Go ahead and pin all the way around. And that's our side seam. We want to open that up, keep it open. Once we have our waistband pinned to our garment, we will stitch at the 5/8 inch seam allowance, back stitching at the beginning and at the end of the extension mark. Stitch the waistband to the garment, starting at the small dot using a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Back stitch. And make sure all your layers are smooth and your raw edges are even and meeting each other. Do not sew over your pins. You may need to check your fabric layers as you are stitching to ensure that your layers are staying nice and smooth and flat. Just crossing the center front mark. Coming up on the extension mark, you want to come to the end of that and then back stitch.